Welcome back to part 2 of my mini album tutorial, the start to finish. In the first part, we went over on how to do the spine of the book, the hinge and the pages, 6 pages. So if you have not yet seen that, that's part 1. And in this one, we're going over on how to make the cover of the book. So what you need for that are 2 pieces of 8.5 by 8. You need a spine piece that is 7 3/8 by 4.5. You need a sheet of Tyvek, and the Tyvek that I use, my sister is a secretary, so she cuts off all the addresses and gives me all her scrap sheets, and it's usually plenty. It's those envelopes that you send through the post office. They're very strong. You can also purchase Tyvek. I've purchased it before from Office Depot. You could get it from Office Max, any type of office supply store. It's Tyvek. And let me write this down. That's how it's spelled. And this piece is 7.5 by 4 3/4. Then you also need chipboard. You need 2 pieces for the front and back cover, 7.5 by 5 3/4. 2 pieces of that, and a spine piece 7.5 by 1 7/8. I've already adhered some tape, as you can see, around the corners of this. And what I need to do is on my 2 pieces of 8.5 by 8, you want to, with the 8.5 facing up, okay, so this is 8.5, you want to overlap the pieces of paper by 1/2 inch and adhere it down. So I'm using my 1/2 inch tape, which will be my guide as to how far I need to adhere them, and I will also use my grid mat to help. But the first thing I do is carefully place my tape right along the edge on the 8.5 inch side. Because if I'm careful and I get it right on the edge, then I can use this as my guide. Okay, I'm going to burnish that down. Using my Tim Holtz paper piercer to remove the backing. And now I want to make sure that I have both the 8.5 inch on the right side, and I want to overlap this just by 1/2 inch. Okay, so I'm going to line that up on my grid. This does not have to be perfect, but it sure helps if you can get it pretty close. And then I'll burnish that down, flip it over, and burnish it on the other side. Now, the next thing I want to do, I'm going to set that aside for a minute. I want to prepare my spine piece. So I need to get my piece of Tyvek along with my spine, and I'm going to adhere this right in the middle. Okay, so I've added tape completely to one side. I tend to use a lot of tape. I feel it's worth it for the binding. I've never had a problem with my albums coming apart, so I like to do it this way. So let me just go ahead and remove the taping on the back. This is also something you can use wet glue if you'd like. Hot glue, you probably would not have a chance to place it down without getting bubbles in it. You have to work really fast with hot glue. So now in this is where I like to use my centering ruler. This is 4 3/4. So I'm just going to center this as best I can. This again does not have to be perfect. And this is almost 2 inches. So I'm just gonna butt that up and lay it down. I like to use my roller and just kind of go over that. You can use your bone folder, whatever you'd like to do. Now the next thing I'm going to do is completely tape the back of this. This is what will be holding on to our covers, our paper covers. So again, I like to use quite a bit of tape on this. I will fast forward through this. Okay, so I've completely added tape to the entire back of this, as you can see. I may go overboard on tape. You may not need to use this much, but I sleep better at night not worrying about my albums coming apart. So as you can see, I've completely added tape across here, and I've added it completely across here. I left a little gap there simply because my cover will be butt up close to that and it has tape on it. So that's the only reason I left a little bit of a gap there. Now, the next thing I want to do is add my spine to my 2 cover pieces. The way the book is, these are 8.5 tall and the book is 7.5 tall. So there will be a 1/2 inch gap on both sides. So what I like to do, this is completely up to you. I like to mark in a 1/2 inch. That way I have a guide to set this down on. So let me grab my other ruler here. Okay, so my spine again is 7.5. So I just want to mark in a 1/2 inch. Okay, so I'm going to use my ruler and just mark this in the middle and just give myself a 1/2 inch here and do the exact same thing on the bottom. Like I said, you don't have to do this. Just makes it a little bit easier for myself. Then I also like to mark my center of my spine. I have tape on it, but I'm just going to put a little indent there. Actually, I need to do, yeah. Okay, so the center of my spine will match up right here in the center where my 2 pieces of papers connect. So when the book is done, this overlapping piece will be right in the center of the spine. Hopefully you can see that. That piece there. So where the 2 pieces overlap, I'm going to center my spine. So let me go ahead and put you on fast play while I take all the backing off this tape. Okay, so I'm just going to press that on. Again, use my brayer and go over the back of it. Make sure it's really pressed down. Now, the next thing I want to do is I will go ahead and just remove all the tape from along here. So next next thing we're going to do is attach our covers on. What you want to do when you're attaching your covers is leave a small gap so when you fold up the cover, you don't have to worry about it running into your spine. Rule of thumb, in order to do that, you want to use 2 thicknesses of your chipboard. Generally, the chipboard is 1/8 of an inch, so you want to use 2 pieces of this as a guide for your gap. What I have done is I've actually used 2 scraps of chipboard and I've glued them together with hot glue, and that's your space in between. You can hold that on there if you choose to do it this way and then use that as your space and glue your covers on. What I find though is I like a little bit, because of the amount in the book, I like a little bit more of a gap in my spine. You don't have to do it this way. I think most people do it with the 2 pieces of gap, 1/8 and then 1/8 again. I do it with 3. And what I've done here is I have 2 pieces of the chipboard I normally use, and then this black piece that's in here is a real thin piece of chipboard. So it's not quite 3 thicknesses of chipboard that I've glued here. It's 2 and then a smaller piece. I don't know how well you can see that, but the black is definitely smaller than my 1/8 pieces that I have here. I do this, like I said, simply because I like a little bit more of a gap. I find that when I do that, I don't have to worry about the spine at all cracking. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Right in here, I never have to worry about my paper cracking. When I've done 2 thicknesses, separated them with 2 thicknesses, I have had the paper crack. Now it could be the paper that I'm using. So if you only want to do that, it does make the book a little bit looser by using 3 pieces. So maybe try it out and see what you like best. But I have found that I like this best. So now I'm going to remove the tape from one side of my chipboard. And again, I've removed all the tape from the binding, the spine, and the tie-back piece. So I'm going to use this as my guide. Again, this is leaving my gap in between. And sometimes this wants to stick to the tape, so no big deal. I want to make sure that, I hope my hand's not in the way, I want to make sure that is butted right up against my spine. And now I'm going to use this, and what I'm looking at is the very bottom edge of my spine here to the bottom of my book. And I'm just eyeballing it to see if I can get them fairly even. So once I kind of get it up there, I look and make sure I'm happy with how it's lined, and then set it down and pull this piece off. So as you can see, that's quite a bit of a gap, but in between that gap is that Tyvek, so that will keep it very strong. Okay, now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. I'm going to remove my tape backing from one side of my chipboard. I'm going to make sure that's butted up against it. And you know, I do normally add a little bit, I forgot on the first one, not that it's a big deal, but I do normally like to add a little bit of wet glue right in the middle just to give the paper a little bit more to adhere to. Not necessary, I don't think. And before committing to it, I'm making sure that everything is lined up and that this cover is pushed up against my guide here. And then I'll go ahead and lay it down and pull that guide out. And then I just save this for every mini album that I use. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and press it down. Okay, so as you can see, on the one side I have about a 1/2 inch. I have a 1/2 inch all the way around, and on this side I have a little bit more than a 1/2 inch, which you can fold it over, but I don't like to do that because it's just wasting tape. So I'm going to mark in a 1/2 inch. Let's see. Again, this does not have to be perfect. Okay, and then I'm just going to cut that off. And throw that piece away. Now, I got a little bit of ahead of myself when I put the tape on both sides. I normally don't put the tape on this side of the chipboard. It does not matter, however you want to do it. Normally, I only put tape on the side that's already down. I normally don't put tape on the full part of this because I usually put it along the entire border, and then when you flip up the border, it's taped down. But being that I've already taped it, it does not matter. It's how you choose to do it. Like I said, let me just reiterate. You would not normally see tape around these edges on the front and the back cover. I normally would take my tape and run along the entire edge of this, both sides, and the top. Again, it does not matter. It's going to work out to be the exact same. So you might even prefer to do it this way. But one thing you do want to do is miter the corners. Now you want to cut off, leaving about an 1/8 inch gap from your chipboard to your paper. Again, I just eyeball this. You don't want to cut it directly to your chipboard. I hope you can see let me move the tape a little so you can see that. So as you can see, there's just a little bit in between your paper and your chipboard. Again, you just kind of want to eyeball it. If you cut it too close, it will not wrap correctly, which I've done plenty of times. Okay, so you just want to take off those corners. Next thing you want to do is teach your paper how you want it to fold. So you just kind of take that and fold it. You just want to start creasing it, start telling your paper how you want it to fold. You want to break up those fibers so it folds a little bit better. So I do this on all of my sides. It'll just make it easier once you go to fold it. Okay, now before you actually fold it, you need to take off the tape. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the tape here. Normally you would be removing the tape from all of the edges of your paper if you did it that way. Again, it really doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because we made this a 1/2 inch over on all sides. If it was bigger, then it might matter because you'd have so much paper and not enough tape. But in this case, it's perfect. So now I start from the middle, and I always start with my long end. Start from the middle and just work my way down. And being that we had tape on all the edges, it's going to cover that entire length. I take my bone folder and just go over that to make sure it's down. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to just really work that and push it down. Okay, and again, go over with my bone folder. Now before you crease up the sides, you have a little extra paper right there. If you fold it over, you're going to have a chunk of paper hanging off the edge. So what I do is take my bone folder and tuck those corners in. And I'll show you up close what I mean here in a minute. Okay, so I just kind of tuck that in. I hope you can see that. As opposed to this part hanging out right there. This part is tucked in. So I'm going to do that with all of my corners. And you don't want to be too rough with this because it could tear your paper. Just take your bone folder and tuck it in. Let me see if you can see a little bit better on this one. There you go. Okay. Okay, now that those are tucked in, you want to go ahead and do the same thing on the sides. because we cut off those corners but didn't cut off too much, it gives us a perfect fold right there on the edges. If we would have cut off too much, you would have a gap there and see the chipboard. But as you can see, it's a perfect, there you go, you can see it's a perfect match right there. And that's on all 4 corners. Then I like to set it on its top and just very lightly with my bone folder go across here just to give it a nice finished edge. Very lightly. Okay, so the next thing I like to do is take my spine piece and place that down. It should pretty much go from top to bottom, leaving a small space. And I will go ahead and add my tape. Again, you want to make sure that this is completely covered in tape, because if not, I have done it before where I left a small gap, and when you fold the book, it will actually bubble your paper if there's no tape. So whether you're gluing this down or taping it down, make sure you have tape completely covering it. And what's very important, which I did when I was preparing it, you want to have tape right at the edge of this cover and the edge of this cover, also at the edge of this spine and this spine. So if you don't use as much tape as I am by covering the entire spine piece, definitely make sure you put a piece of tape along the edge of the spine on this side, the edge of the spine on this side, the edge of the cover on this side, and this side. And again, I make sure that my entire spine has tape down, because if not, when the book folds up, you will actually get a big bubble in your page here. So you don't want to do that. Now, being that there is already tape, this is how I like to do it. I definitely add tape to the top and the bottom of my spine piece, because I want to make sure that along the edge of this it's adhered very well. And then I, of course, add it to the edges, and then I start adding in a couple pieces of tape, and then check it against this. I can see where my tape is, so I just kind of hold it, and I can see that this will, if I only add that amount of tape, I can see there's already enough tape on my spine to cover the middle here. So I just kind of hold it up and see and make sure that that's going to be enough tape, which I can see that it is. So let me go ahead and burnish it down and add that onto my page. Okay, again, this I like to use my centering ruler for. Not necessary. If you would rather eyeball it, you can eyeball it. And this piece, let me just see where I need to. Okay. So I'm just generally going by this. This does not have to be perfect, but you do want to get it fairly close. Okay, and once I have it down, I'm going to burnish that down, use my brayer to make sure it's completely covered. Okay, once you have that, you want to very gently raise your paper, and you want to do it very gently. I kind of rub my finger over it. If you just turn your book, you could possibly cause this to crack. So you very gently want to just reinforce that, and I very, very, very gently go over it with my bone folder. I have pushed too hard and caused that to crack, so you don't want to do that. Just very gently show your book the way you want it to close. Okay, and then turn around and do the exact same thing on the other side. I use my finger and slowly lift this up. And very, very gently go over it with my bone folder. Okay, so here is the cover of your book. What I like to do is set it aside, place something heavy on it, and just leave it like that. Let it just, and after it sits for a little while, it's perfect. It won't open up like this. Okay, so the next video will be on adding pockets and different things to the book. So that'll be part 3. So I hope you join me for that, and thanks for watching.